students, we will continue our study of modern world architecture and we will move on to the evolution of skyscrapers. As part of this series of study on skyscrapers, this is part 1 of it, and we will just recall what we had seen before this, because what happened in Chicago laid the foundation of the modern day skyscraper. Chicago School, or what also was called as the commercial style, led to the creation of the modern office building or the modern tall building, later on the skyscraper, and it had a subsequent impact all across the world, in Europe, in Asia and other parts of the world, with strongest growth of this school or this style of architecture from 1879 to 1910, and it was more or less parallel to the Art Nouveau movement in Europe. So there was a lot of architectural evolution, architectural change happening on both sides of the Atlantic. When it came to the skyscraper design in Chicago, the various preconditions required for tall buildings were met one by one. For example, steel frame construction, vital for erecting a tall building, a gridiron pattern to bring about modular construction, floating foundations for the muddy soil of Chicago, fireproofing the steel frame, which they came to realize its importance after the 1870-1871 Chicago fire, passenger elevator by Elisha Otis, without which it wouldn't have been possible to make tall buildings or to make them profitable or usable. Standardization, which led to not only standardization of structural elements but also of the doors and windows and other elements of construction, and then simple features like the Chicago window, which happened to be this, what you see here, two hinged parts on the outside and a center fixed glass. This was the design of the Chicago window. So this all was leading to the rise of the modern skyscraper. Additionally, when we put all these ideas together of what happened in Chicago, it led to floor to ceiling windows, very nearly converting this into a glass box. A rejection of facade decoration that came slowly, particularly with Louis Sullivan talking about the use of ornamentation with regard to tall buildings. It became a simple grid iron structural system. More rentable space was possible because it was on a grid, and therefore the columns were slender, more space was available. Easier in interior designing, again because of modular coordination and standardization, and deeper penetration of daylight in the building because of extensive use of glass. And for the first time we see that already happening in Chicago, that the external wall became a curtain wall. Though they did wrap it up with a lot of use of terracotta, etc., had it been a sheet of glass also, it would have sufficed. And that is what happened later in the 20th century, when the facade of the skyscraper became near curtain glass wall and complete sleek glass treatment was given, like we see here in the Liver House in the 1950s in New York. Now, Sullivan had solved the aesthetic problem of the tall building, and he had said a genuine form of the tall office building has to be based on the steel cage construction. He was influenced by Wiley Duck and thus gave rise to the dictum form ever follows function, or form follows function. But he said that this does not happen mechanically, that function doesn't automatically, that form doesn't automatically arise out of the function, but it requires an intuitive intervention of the architect to make the building have an aesthetically pleasing form. Also, the building ought to be free from all historical styles, all past styles, and it should be actually a solution to technical challenges that are posed by such a tall building. It is true that in his lifetime also he did use a certain amount of ornamentation, as you find here in, for example, the Wainwright building, the Art Nouveau kind of ornamentation. But later on, in the summa of all his work, the Carson Peary Scott store, we find that even that amount of the ornamentation, the Art Nouveau ornamentation, was also very severely limited. But when we move into the 20th century and we see these buildings, we realize that one thing that Sullivan was also focusing on, and that he talked about, the tall building must be tall. In every sense it must be tall. So he made an attempt aesthetically also to give this appearance of tallness in his buildings. And thus we find what is the one thing that attracts you and I to the skyscraper? It's the height of the skyscraper, how tall it is. Whether it is the John Hancock Center in 1969 by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, or the World Trade Center by Minoru Yamasaki, or the more recent One World Trade Center again by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill in 2013. Skyscraper's greatest attraction is its tallness. Now, not only did the work happen in Chicago, gradually New York also got looped in, and from 1890 to 1910 we see the rise of skyscrapers in New York. It was the influence of Chicago school there, again demand of a growing population which gave rise to urbanization and brought intense pressure on the land, and thus the need to go vertical. As a result of this, there was demand for more office spaces in the commercial hubs of the city, and just as in Chicago it was this area called the Loop that became the focus of the skyscrapers, in New York it became the island of Manhattan as the focus of the skyscrapers. So there was great vertical expansion in New York, and two buildings stand out in this period of the 1910s, 1920s. One is Equitable Building, which is 169 meters, and the Woolworth Building, which was 241 meters. Both of them genuine skyscrapers greater than 150 meters. And then a whole range of buildings that came up in the first 20-25 years of the 20th century, all of them in New York, and they were the New York skyscrapers. Now, Equitable Building brought to the front a problem that had been growing with the rise of these vertical masses of tall buildings. It was a 38-story building in the financial district of Lower Manhattan. It was a landmark engineering achievement as a skyscraper completed in 1915. It turned out to be the largest office building in the world at that time in terms of square footage. The problem was that this building's total floor area was 30 times its site area. It had a floor area of more than 111500 square meters as against 3700 square meters of the plot size. And this controversy that this building came straight up on the site without any setbacks and thus did not allow sunlight to reach to the street level. So what was the outrage? That about 28,000 square meters of shadow was created because of this building on the surrounding streets, completely cutting off sunlight, and at least 3 other buildings near the Equitable Building the sunlight was completely cut off, and many New Yorkers started thinking that if this trend continues, all we'll be left with is these dark and dingy streets in New York because of these very tall buildings. And thus, as a response to that came up the zoning resolution of 1916, and this was very important because this was showing us the path to what the modern skyscrapers would be globally. It was that it limited the height and the bulk of these tall buildings, and it helped in shaping the iconic vertical expansion of the city and assured that sunlight and air would come down to the street level. So how did they do that? They did that by what came to be called as the setback principle. That as the skyscraper rises up, after with a given mathematical formula of setback line, it will keep on setting back. And as a result of that, it will allow penetration of daylight all the way to the street. And thus came to be known the rise of the setback or the wedding cake skyscrapers, shaped like a wedding cake, with these floors mounted, and that would be constantly receding back or setting back, giving rise to the skyscraper. So if before 1916 this was the pre-1916 New York skyscraper, this became the post-1916 skyscraper, and this completely changed the way skyscrapers are coming up there. For example, this is a very classic example of a setback skyscraper. This style caught on from Chicago to Shanghai, says Eric Peter Nash and Norman McGrath, and we find that, for example, in the Leningradskaya Hotel in Moscow in 1953, we see that in the Chicago Board of Trade building in 1930, we see that in the Park Hotel in China in 1934. So wherever skyscrapers came up across the globe, they followed the principle of the setback skyscraper. And we also have modern setback skyscrapers. The same principle we see observed in the Petronas Tower in Kuala Lumpur, the Taipei 101 in Taipei, or the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Of course, the reason for these setbacks has got nothing to do with light not penetrating at the street level. It's more to do with the structure of the building. That such three of the most tall buildings of our times, Petronas Tower, Taipei 101 and Burj Khalifa, that in order to erect these tall buildings, this kind of structural system was evolved, and in a slightly later presentation, I will be touching upon the structural systems of these buildings. As a result of the 1916 zoning resolution, there was a dramatic transformation in the skyline of New York. You can see across the city, you will find setback skyscrapers all over the city. And then came the Art Deco in setback skyscrapers. Art Deco was a style that originated in France in between the interwar periods, 1920s to 1940s, and it was having traditional craft ideas along with machine age imagery and materials. Because of industrialization and the coming in of lot of industrial products into the society, like the automobiles or the radio or the ice box or other kitchen appliances or many other appliances around the house, people got to use these industrial products in their day-to-day lives and they were very fascinated by it. They had a very deep connect or fascination with these appliances, and as a result, architects started bringing this kind of aesthetic into their buildings also. And we find across not just buildings but even in cars and even in other appliances, a certain style was observed, and that was this Art Deco, traditional craft ideas married with machine age imagery. First in France in the interwar period, and rapid industrialization was transforming culture. Then it spread internationally between the 20s and the 40s, but post World War II, because of many reasons like the destruction of so many cities and many other new and urgent requirements of around the globe of housing and buildings, etc., this movement just faded out. But while it lasted, it was a combination of rich colors, bold geometric shapes and lavish ornamentation. And if there is one skyscraper that is the iconic symbol of Art Deco, it is the Chrysler Building in New York, made in 1930. It's an Art Deco masterpiece, particularly the pinnacle of the Chrysler Building. So if Art Deco and Art Nouveau, if we try to compare it, Art Nouveau was based on organic imagery. If you remember my previous lectures, I talked about biomorphic and zoomorphic forms, etc. Art Deco, on the other hand, was built around machine age imagery. So if you just see two kind of ornamentations, this is Art Deco. It's symmetrical, it's rectilinear, and it's responding to demands of machine and new material. Art Nouveau, on the other hand, is luxury and glamour and use of whiplash lines and vegetal features and forms, etc. It was also looking ahead or moving ahead in terms of ornamentation, away from historical ornamentation. These are a series of Art Deco skyscrapers, setback, wedding cake skyscrapers that came up in the 1920s and 1930s. Not only that, like I said, even in furniture and other products, Art Deco became dominant. It was an entire style, an entire society that was built around Art Deco fashion, Art Deco style. And the key evolution in trends that we see as we have studied these past movements, we touched upon Baroque when we had begun, and we had moved on to Art Nouveau. Now we are talking about Art Deco, and we will move towards modernism. All this development happened, the major influence being industrialization. So what we find in ornamentation is we are moving towards simplicity. If ornamentation was highly dense and complex in Baroque, it becomes more straight line and simple, neat and tidy in modernism. So from Baroque's access to modernism's minimalism. When we talk of material innovation, from luxurious materials in Baroque, We find industrial and functional materials in Art Deco and later on in modernism. Nature versus geometry, whereas earlier we find organic forms, for example in Art Nouveau, we find geometric patterns and abstract simplicity as we move to the modern times. Now, two Art Deco skyscrapers really stand out. Like I said, one is the Chrysler in 1930, which was 19 meters tall, and the second was the Empire State Building in 1931, which was 443 meters tall. Both of them had this spire at the top, at the pinnacle of the buildings, and both of them are iconic symbols of skyscrapers in the modern times. They have got this distinct pinnacle, these spires at the top, and this was a precursor to the competition that began between Chicago and New York to make the tallest tall buildings. And so we have, if Chicago had the John Hancock Center at 344 meters in 1965, the Vista Tower in 2020, 365 meters. I am going by the height, not by the chronology. We have the Trump Tower in 2009 at 423 meters, and the Willis Tower, earlier called the Sears Tower, in 1974 at 442 meters. And in New York we have 30 Hudson Yard at 390. We've got 432 Park Avenue, which is a residential building. It's a pencil thin residential skyscraper. Hopefully we'll talk about it. 426 meters. Empire State at 443, and the One World Trade Center at 541 meters. So there's a competition between these two skyscraper cities within America. And in New York, the tallest that followed, there was the World Trade Center by Minoru Yamasaki in 1966 to 75. Unfortunately, in the 9/11 attacks, terror attacks in New York, these two monuments of skyscrapers are completely destroyed. The site was later on cleared up, and what you see here are these two areas where the two skyscrapers stood. The One World Trade Center has now been erected on the side or the edge of this entire site. This is the One World Trade Center by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and it is taller than the earlier two towers of the World Trade Center, and therefore it has been built very near to the footprint of the original towers. See the changing skyline of New York. You see that in 1920, 1950, 1980 and 1980. You see the World Trade Centers. 2020 and World Trade Center is there, and the city has grown even further in the number of skyscrapers it has. Then this entire competition, this race to have the tallest buildings across the world, from early 20th century the race began and continues still today. So across the world, if you look at the tallest buildings, we have at one time the Petronas Towers were the tallest, and then other buildings and followed like Taipei 101. Then we have this Abraj El Baid in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, which is close to which is 600 meters plus. It's a mega tall skyscraper. We have this building, the Shanghai Tower in Shanghai in China, and then there is the Burj Khalifa at 800 plus meters. So across the globe there is this competition to make the tallest skyscrapers. So we have the skyscrapers of greater than 150 meters, we have the super tall greater than 300 meters, we have the mega tall greater than 600 meters. That category of mega tall has only about 3 or 4 skyscrapers today, not more, but many are proposed. Another thing we find that skyscrapers are a very good indicator of the rising economic strength of any country. We find, for example, that lot of skyscrapers are coming up in India also. We have Mumbai, we have other cities in India, we have Delhi, where many skyscrapers are already built and are coming up. As the economies rise, one of the built forms that rises along with that is the skyscraper. So here architectural styles and technological advancements that happened in Chicago and New York with regard to the skyscrapers then spread throughout the world, and many more advances took place. But we will again be going back to New York, and I'll be telling you, especially through the study of structures of some of the skyscrapers, how vital those developments in New York were, particularly, or vital in Chicago were again, particularly with the contribution of structural engineer Fazlur Khan, who worked for Skidmore Owings in Merrill, and how he was responsible for laying the foundation of modern skyscraper structures. We'll come back to that later, but here we have amazing forms showing great advances in style and technology in skyscrapers, whether it is the Bank of China or it is the Petronas Tower, or groundbreaking engineering techniques and architectural styles. They have become standards in construction practices of skyscrapers globally, whether it is Type A 101, which has got a massive mass-tuned damper to prevent it from earthquake damage, or this building in China. So tremendous things are being done, tremendous technology is at the background of modern day skyscrapers. Urban skylines as a result are changing dramatically, whether it is New York or Chicago, Hong Kong or Shanghai or even Mumbai. So much so that sometimes it is difficult for us to decipher which skyline is of which city because of the multitude of skyscrapers that we find in all of them. Now we've seen the Art Deco skyscraper. Let us now talk about the modern skyscraper in the international style. The key principle being form follows function. The major architectural style of the 1920s and 1930s was the international style. In the formative decades of modern architecture, the emphasis was on style, form and aesthetics, and the term international style was given by Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson. They had held an exhibition on international exhibition of modern architecture in 1930 in New York, and there the term the international style came to classify or to indicate the whole collection of buildings which were all very similar to each other, and they were coming up in Europe, they were coming up in America, whether it was the Crown Hall or the Bauhaus, the Barcelona Pavilion or the Villa Savoy, Tugendhat House in the Czech Republic by Mies van der Rohe, or the Villa Muller in the Czech Republic again by Adolf Loos. All these buildings spoke the same architectural language. And what is that language? The characteristics are that architecture is to be seen as a volume. Thin planes or surfaces create the building form as opposed to solid and heavy mass. Number 2, these buildings were typically rectilinear orthogonal forms with flat roofs, straight lines, right angles. They were very light planes, light plane surfaces without ornamentation, and the reason for the light plane surfaces on the outside was because the structural system was either RCC frame or steel frame, and thus these walls were all non-load bearing walls, and thus they were free flowing interiors and use of modern materials like glass, steel and RCC. We will go into more depth of this style not only when we study about styles and movements, but also when we study the works of Wright, Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe and Walter Gropius. This became a dominant movement in the 20th century with extensive use of glass, curtain walls made of glass, materials were celebrated through exposed structures, and all sorts of buildings, residential, institutional, commercial buildings, they were made using through the international style. So if we have a residential building like the Glass House by Philip Johnson, we have an institutional building, the United Nations building in USA, and we have the commercial building, the AMA Plaza in USA by Mies van der Rohe in 1972. So essentially the international style has its roots in Europe, and it spread from Europe to America, from 1920s Europe to 1930s America, and the skyscraper technique had already been established in the USA, but now because of the coming in of the international style, this skyscraper got a very sleek and modern look without any decoration and use of steel and glass on the outside of the building. That means completely visible to the naked eye, and this also came to be called as corporate modernism. And if there is one person who is singularly responsible for bringing this connection between the international style modernism and the modern day skyscraper, that person is Mies van der Rohe. Because Mies van der Rohe had to flee Germany with the rise of the Nazis there, and when he left Germany, he landed in America. he settled down and began teaching in Illinois Institute of Technology, and while he was there he got connected with architectural profession. He started architectural practice there and did many buildings and established two main forms of buildings which are vitally important: the long span, that is the tall building, and the large span building, that is building or column free spaces, and we will come to that point later. But if there is one man singularly responsible for the modern day glass and steel skyscraper as we see it, it is Mies van der Rohe. He was the pioneer. Now, skyscrapers in cities, growth in cities in the first half of the 20th century and the rise of international style modernism led to this indication it is suitable for vast urban projects. That these skyscrapers are actually cities within cities where we can maximize floor space for a given site, and while at the same time convincing local planners, politicians and general public that this kind of development will bring much needed wealth, much needed resources, economic resources into the city. So when we see evolution, for example in aesthetic, if this is the Chicago School skyscraper, then this is the international style sleek skyscraper aesthetic. Corporate modernism with Mies van der Rohe in the background, building symbolic of corporate identity like the Dirksen Federal Building by Mies van der Rohe in 1964 in Chicago. Or even another example by Walter Gropius, the MetLife building in New York in 1963, which was earlier called the Pan Am building. Another example, now going all the way to Norway, just to show you the extent of the rise of this glass and steel skyscraper, the Oslo Plaza, but by White Architecture in 1990. Now, because of Mies van der Rohe coming to the United States and this pioneering work happening here, it gave rise to what came to be called as the late Chicago School, the use of the international style in the buildings of Mies van der Rohe. And he came up with one project called the Lakeshore Drive Apartments in 1948 in Chicago, which had two identical towers placed at right angles to each other, 26-story towers 46 feet apart from each other and axis perpendicular to each other. Now, a new architecture was rising, and all these four people we will study a little in detail. What did they give us? Frank Lloyd Wright gave to architecture propositions, and we will talk about them. Le Corbusier gave us points of a new architecture. Mies van der Rohe gave us elements for modern architecture. Walter Gropius talked about functions with regard to modern architecture. These are four houses, each one is symbolic of their architecture. If Falling Water is the house that tells us about the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, Villa Savoy is what tells us about the architecture of Le Corbusier, the Farnsworth house by Mies van der Rohe, and the Gropius house by Walter Gropius. And what were the elements of Miesian architecture? Like I said, each four of them, they gave us something. Mies gave us elements, and the elements were, he used steel, glass, stone and water. And this standard palette he used throughout his lifetime to create an architecture of such superb quality and such tremendous proportion and beauty that even today when skyscrapers are measured in terms of their quality, they are measured by the works of Mies van der Rohe. And here we have a standard palette that he used throughout his career. So like I said, he was a pioneer of, I can say, the tall span, the skyscraper, and the large span, the column free space. This is the Seagram building, and this is the New National Gallery in Berlin. He also gave us the dictum less is more. That means we can speak or we can do or show more with less things. Brought about great clarity and purity in the forms. The structure was left exposed. The interiors were very simple and all excess was removed, and to show that less with less, to show less, more precision is needed. And that is why the architecture of Mies van der Rohe was very precise. It had a tremendous amount of precision and quality in it. In the Lakeshore Drive Apartments, we find rigorous consistency of design through uniform treatment of each building face. Regardless of orientation, all four faces of the building are the same. And when we talk of less is more, expressing more with less, he went on towards perfection through the same architectural system. So if he made the Lakeshore Drive apartments and then later on the Seagram Bend and later on this complex in Chicago, we find he continues to follow the same architectural template and keeps on going towards perfection in his design and in the proportions in his architecture. There is great simplicity and clarity. It is all very well articulated. Each element speaks very distinctly and clearly its architectural language. The structural frame is very clearly expressed on the surface of the building, and there is minimum inflection. Inflection is when the building does not have monotony, when it speaks a different language or appears differently, say at the edge, the middle and the other side, or it is different at the base and at the top, then we say that the building has got inflection. It is not monotonous. When we speak in a monotone, that means we are speaking without inflection. In a similar way in architecture, when a building side and center, top and bottom are the same, we say the building does not have inflection. But in the case of Mies van der Rohe, he brought down inflection to the bare minimum. We find that center and side, bottom and top, there is minimum inflection. But the building is not boring, even though it does not give rise to monotony as it would be defined, but it gives rise to a lot of interest because of the proportion of his buildings. It is a very rational use of repeated building elements. Technology is a very critical factor in the design of Mies's work. Steel skeleton made the traditional load-bearing building techniques completely obsolete. There is structural clarity and simplicity as we see in the works of Mies van der Rohe, and the result is a very rigorous and a very disciplined architecture. Its principle is clear harmony between form, function and technology, and form and appearance express the potential of the materials and the structural engineering. So when we look at this plan of the Lakeshore Drive apartment, we find it's got a steel skeletal frame and the main columns are placed 21 feet apart from each other, which is clearly expressed in the elevation of the building also. You know that this is 21 feet or 7 meter center to center, and it's very neat and clean space within. This is one individual apartment and the spaces within flow into each other. As you walk in, you have a kitchen or a kitchenette, and then there is a large space which is completely open and free flowing, and the way the spaces are delinked from each other is not by making boxes, but by providing partitions that separates the main living and dining area from the washroom at the behind, and then there is the bedroom area. So it goes on in the other apartments also. He also fireproofed the columns and beams because that is what they had learnt in Chicago school. Therefore, all the structural and non-structural steel members have been painted with black industrial enamel paint to fireproof them. But more than that, that is just for all the members, but actually the columns have also been encased in concrete. The main structural columns have also been encased with concrete before covering them with the industrial enamel paint. So that is the extent of the structural members being fireproofed. So by this we end here, and reaching at this point we realize that now modernism has completely got hold of the skyscraper. This is the skyscraper to which we relate to more than the earlier skyscrapers that I had shown you in Chicago and New York. When we look at these glass and steel buildings of what I showed you of Mies van der Rohe, we can say truly this is what the modern skyscraper looks like. We will continue from here in the next presentation and look at more works of Mies van der Rohe and go on to other later skyscrapers. Thank you.